Welcome back, guys, to Dark Night Scare. In today's episode, I'm sharing 14 true disturbing stories from people living deep home alone in Appalachia. These are the kinds of encounters that make you question what really lives out there. But before we begin, please consider subscribing and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Let me know where you're watching from. Thank you all. Now, let's start. I'm a 33-year-old wildlife biologist, and most of my time is spent in hip waders, ankle-deep in muck, swatting black flies while cataloguing amphibians that most people wouldn't even notice, even if they stepped on them. It's not glamorous work, but I appreciate it. I'm much better at dealing with slimy, four-legged creatures than I am at conversing with people. There's a certain peace in fieldwork. It's quiet and predictable. You follow the data, collect your samples, and draft your reports without anyone breathing down your neck. So, when this contract landed in my inbox, I jumped at the opportunity without a moment's hesitation. A 3-month field assignment in a remote section of the Appalachians, right where the West Virginia border becomes dense and wooded. The job was straightforward: monitor a population of salamanders that didn't follow the known migratory patterns. They wanted data on their movements, numbers, and any anomalies. Easy enough. I was informed I would be working solo, which was the real selling point. They arranged a stay in an old hunting cabin located 30 miles from the nearest paved road. No cell service, no neighbors, no utilities whatsoever. Just the cabin, a wood stove, a composting toilet, a couple of solar panels, and wilderness encircling me in all directions. The nearest town, its name eludes me, something unpronounceable, was a solid 2-hour drive away along winding dirt roads. On the first day, I made a supply run, stocking up on freeze-dried meals and camp fuel, resolving not to go back unless absolutely necessary. The first week went exactly as I hoped, quiet and routine. I mounted my trail cameras along the water, lines, laid down tracking flags, and collected soil samples. The salamanders were precisely where they were supposed to be, perhaps even more populous than anticipated, which felt like a minor victory. Each morning, I trekked the same loop, swapped out SD cards from the cameras, and logged my findings. Each evening, I boiled water for a meal that vaguely resembled chicken and beans, and read until my headlamp flickered out. Nothing strange occurred, just the way fieldwork should transpire, until day 9. That morning, I was sifting through footage from a trail cam set low along the creek bank, designed to capture ground-level movement, critters, etc. The timestamp read 2:43 a.m. At first glance, I thought it captured a deer. There was a quick flash of movement low in the frame, too large to be a possum, but low enough to rule out a human. However, the image unnerved me, so I slowed it down. It wasn't a deer. It was skin. Bare, pale skin sliding across the earth as if coated in grease. It appeared human or close, crawling, but not on its hands and knees. It dragged itself flat to the ground. Its arms and legs sprawled at unnatural angles, suggesting the joints didn't line up correctly. The head hung low, face scraping against the dirt. It zipped through the frame in under 5 seconds. No clothing, no pack, no flashlight, nothing. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. Eventually, I packed my gear and made my way back to the creek, expecting to find tracks, mud prints, disturbed leaves, anything. But there was nothing. The ground was soft from recent rain, yet untouched. No impressions, not even around the cam. Still, I raised the angle, repositioned the camera higher up a tree, and added 2 more pointing in opposite directions of the original. I reassured myself it was just an illusion, perhaps some prankster out hiking at night. The explanation made no real sense, but it felt better than contemplating the alternative. 2 nights later, I awoke suddenly in the middle of the night. Generally, I'm not a light sleeper. Years in the field train one to tune out the sounds of raccoons, wind, and even coyotes, but this was different. I woke as if someone snapped their fingers in front of me. At first, I didn't know why. I just lay blinking in the darkness, trying to discern what had disrupted my sleep. It was dead silent. None of the gentle rustling of trees, frogs, or night insects. Just this heavy, unnatural quiet pressing against the cabin walls. Then I heard it, a knock, not on the door, but on the wall directly behind my head. I froze. It was a single, deliberate knock, not frantic or random, but one firm rap exactly where my bed was pushed against the wall. About 15 seconds later, another knock followed, softer, slower, almost hesitant, before something scraped down the wall. It resembled a slow drag, fingers or claws trailing along the wood grain from top to bottom. My breath hitched, my throat dried up, and my hand instinctively tightened around my knife packed in my sleeping bag. I didn't move or sit up. I simply lay there, holding that knife tightly until dawn broke. The first thing I did once daylight arrived was get dressed and step outside. I investigated the wall. There were no marks and no footprints in the frost-coated soil. No signs anyone had been there. Then I walked the perimeter to check my cameras. One of them, the one facing the trail, had been rotated. Not broken, not blown over by the wind, just turned. It now faced directly up into the sky. I touched it. The plastic was warm, as if someone had recently handled it. That unnerved me more than anything else. I removed all the SD cards, loaded up my gear, and made a beeline for the ranger station in town. The drive took nearly 2 hours. Upon arrival, I informed the guy behind the desk that I believed someone might be wandering in the woods at night. He blinked slowly, then replied, "Ain't nobody going out there this time of year." And with a hint of a grin added, "Nobody but you." He was right. This area of the mountains isn't exactly a tourist destination. No trails, no campsites, just miles of dense thicket and steep drop-offs. If you wander in there, you better have a map and a reason. I refrained from mentioning the footage. When I finally returned to the cabin, I found the front door ajar. Not forced or broken, just wide open. I paused about 10 feet from the porch, one hand on my knife, waiting. Nothing moved, no sound. Eventually, I stepped inside. All my muscles tensed. Everything was in place, my laptop, camera gear, and notes. But every drawer was pulled open. Every cabinet door flung wide. Even the trapdoor hidden beneath the cot was lifted. Nothing was taken. Everything remained, just opened. That night, I barricaded the door with the table and stayed up once more with my knife, alert for any sounds. Each time the wind shifted, I jolted, yet nothing transpired. The following morning, I reviewed the camera footage again. There was a clip from the camera I mounted higher. It captured a shape similar to before, moving toward the lens just before 3 a.m. It crawled slowly, its belly dragging, limbs twitching as if struggling to move. It halted directly in front of the camera, then gazed up. Its face was incomprehensible, sagging, skin as if it didn't fit the bones correctly, eyes wide and unblinking, mouth just hanging open without words or sounds, merely a gaping hole as though it wished to pull the camera inside. Then it slipped back out of frame. That was enough for me. I burned the clip onto a USB, drafted an urgent report, and the following day submitted everything to the research office. I never received a response, not even a delivery confirmation. That night, I heard voices, initially faint and far off, mere whispers gliding through the trees. I turned off every light, sat in a corner of the cabin, gripping my knife with both hands. As the whispers drew closer, sometimes I thought I heard my name, occasionally laughter, but it was all too hushed to be certain. Then, it all stopped. The next morning, I found something outside the cabin, an immaculate ring of bones, small animal bones, meticulously arranged. Within the circle was one of my trail cameras, its SD card absent. I didn't pack properly, just grabbed my boots, the USB backup, and my keys. I left everything behind and drove until I hit city lights, curling up in my car behind a grocery store, the dome light on. A week later, the company sent me a termination notice. Nothing more than a bland paragraph indicating the project had been closed and all data archived. My login access was revoked. That was it. I never spoke of what transpired, neither to colleagues nor friends. I quit fieldwork and took a desk job in Charleston, writing mundane summaries for grants I didn't believe in. A family friend contacted me a few days before their departure and mentioned that their mum was going in for surgery. They needed someone to keep an eye on the house, ensuring the pipes didn't freeze, retrieving the mail, and feeding the dog. It seemed like an easy task. Honestly, I didn't hesitate. Work had been suffocating for months. Constant calls, deadlines, noise. The thought of a week in the woods seemed like the ideal getaway. No boss breathing down my neck, no Slack notifications, pinging at 11 p.m. Just me, a dog, and a cozy fireplace. I reassured myself it would be good for my well-being, like hitting the reset button. The drive out was longer than I anticipated. 2 hours of highway followed by 40 minutes on winding back roads that kept narrowing until the pavement finally surrendered to gravel. My GPS gave up halfway through, so I had to rely on written directions and a bit of luck. The last stretch dove into a hollow where the trees pressed in so tightly that the sky vanished. It felt like driving down a throat. Upon finally reaching the clearing, the driveway wasn't much of a driveway at all, just 2 muddy ruts. My tires spun fiercely before gaining enough traction to push me to the top. The cabin exceeded my expectations. 2 stories with a steep roof, all dark wood, and a porch wrapping halfway around as if it were offering a slow embrace. It looked sturdy, peaceful. I turned off the engine, and before I even reached the steps, the dog emerged, Daisy, a shaggy shepherd mixed with a coat resembling an old rug. No barking, no hesitation. She trotted right up to me and leaned her entire weight against my leg as if we were the best of friends. That calmed my nerves. The first couple of days passed uneventfully, and I settled into a simple routine. Wake up, toss a few logs on the fire, feed Daisy, and stroll down to the road for the mail. With no Wi-Fi or cell signal, I thought I would miss it. Yet, surprisingly, the tranquility was refreshing. Evenings consisted of reading by the fire or scrolling through old photos on my phone. Most wouldn't load without service, but nighttime was tougher. The cabin creaked, long drawn-out groans reverberating through the beams, sharp cracks popping from the walls as the cold seeped in. Every sound felt magnified, as if the house were conversing in a language I didn't know. On the 3rd morning, I noticed footprints outside. I had gone out back to dispose of the stove ashes, and there they were on the porch. Bare footprints, not small either, wide and deep enough that the previous night's rain had formed distinct heel impressions. Initially, I convinced myself they were old, perhaps from the owners. But then, I spotted the trail leading down the steps, dark smudges of fresh mud curling toward the tree line. Daisy halted in the doorway, her hackles raised. No barking, no growling, just a low, steady rumble emanating from her chest, a warning she didn't want to give. Her eyes fixated on the trees. I grabbed a flashlight, even though the sun was bright outside, and stepped off the porch. The air felt wrong, heavy, like the kind of silence that bears down on your shoulders. The footprints led about 15 feet into the trees before simply ending, not fading away, but abruptly stopping as if the ground had swallowed them. The mud ahead was soft, perfect for tracking, yet there was nothing, just oddly flattened leaves as though something had existed there for a moment and then vanished. I stood there longer than I'd care to admit, scanning the underbrush for any sign of movement. Nothing. The woods stared back, silent. Finally, I reassured myself it was nothing. Perhaps a hunter passing through barefoot for reasons unknown. People are strange after all. This wasn't the city. Things happen out here. I repeated that out loud as if voicing it would make it real. Despite that, when night fell, I slid a chair under the front door handle before heading to bed, just in case. The following morning, the chair was inexplicably on the other side of the room. The door remained locked, as did the windows. I checked twice. My stomach dropped so quickly that it felt hollow. I tore through the cabin in a frenzy, inspecting every closet, under every bed, even the attic hatch wielding the broom handle, like it could help. There was no one. Daisy stayed close. If I moved, she moved. If I paused, she pressed into me with such force that it felt like she wanted to merge with my skin. That evening, I required more firewood. The sun was fading fast, casting a brittle grey-blue hue before darkness took over. My breath emerged in clouds, and the chill had grown sharp. As I rounded the side of the house, I spotted it. The woodpile I had arranged yesterday wasn't just toppled. It was meticulously arranged, forming a perfect circle on the ground. Every log lined up as if measured for spacing. At the center lay a small grey bird, dead, its feathers rigid with frost. Its wings were stretched wide, pinned flat as if someone had intentionally placed them out. Its head was twisted back so far it resembled a question mark. I didn't touch it, didn't even step closer. I retreated slowly and steadily, fearing I might awaken something. Inside, I locked every door, window, and latch I could find. That night, I didn't pretend to sleep. I sat in the living room, gripping a poker like a lifeline. The fire burned low because I dared not open the door. For more wood, my ears strained, making every tick of the cooling metal sound like a gunshot. Somewhere after midnight, I heard it. A soft, clear scrape outside, long and slow, moving across the wall, higher, near the second floor. My skin prickled as if frost was spreading beneath it. Daisy went rigid, her head snapping toward the window. Her growl vibrated deeply, buzzing through the floor. Then came another scrape, farther along, as if something were circling the house, dragging its fingers as it passed. Suddenly, the glass shifted, not shattered, but moved, as if something substantial was pressing from the outside. Then came a smear, a pale shape gliding along the pane, leaving wet, greasy streaks in its wake. It looked like a hand, or more accurately, a crude imitation of a hand, memories fading, with fingers too elongated and joints bent poorly. As those fingers dragged downward, they tapped, tap, 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 one fingernail at a time, unevenly, as if trying to understand a rhythm it couldn't quite grasp. I remained motionless, not daring to blink. My pulse thudded so hard, I felt it in my teeth. When the tapping ceased, the silence that followed was more suffocating than the noise. I remained frozen until dawn broke, every muscle locked, every nerve screaming for release. When I finally dared to look at the window, the streaks were still there, prints, almost human. Almost. That was it for me. I packed my things in under 10 minutes, shoving my toothbrush in without considering what I might have forgotten. I hurried Daisy into the truck and barreled down that mountain as if the trees were converging behind me. At the first gas station, I called the owners and told them they needed to change their locks, maybe put up cameras. I didn't mention the prints, didn't share that I had left every light in that cabin blazing. I've never returned to that ridge. I was 16 when it all began. That evening, my parents headed out to visit my aunt in Fairmont, telling me they'd return late the following morning. It was no big deal. They'd left me alone before. Our house stood halfway up a ridge in West Virginia, nearly invisible from the main road. Trees encircled it like a protective barrier, thick enough that once you stepped a mere 10 feet into them, the house was out of sight. There were no neighbors, no quick escape, just a winding gravel road stretching like a serpent through the woods for nearly a mile before connecting to the highway. The house, though small, was sturdy. It had 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen that perpetually smelled faintly of pine cleaner mixed with smoke from the wood stove. It creaked a little due to its age, but I appreciated that it lent the place a sense of stability and safety. That night, the air outside felt oppressive, an overwhelming heaviness making you hesitate before opening a door. When the mountains plunged into darkness, the experience differed significantly from city nights. It felt final. The porch light was barely sufficient to push back the blackness. Step beyond that halo of light, and it was akin to stepping off the map. I didn't dwell on this for long. I threw a frozen pizza into the oven, dropped my phone on the counter to charge, and created a cozy spot on the couch with an old DVD. Every door was locked, every window secured. I leaned the rifle my father usually kept above the back door, next to me, not due to fear. It's simply what you do when you're alone out here. By 9 p.m., restlessness had set in. Our Wi-Fi was subpar, and cell signals barely existed even on better days. I let the movie play, then began flipping through static on the TV for background noise, an oddly comforting presence, like a voice in the house. Then I heard it. Tires crunching on gravel, slowly making their way up the drive. I froze. No one. Just drives up here randomly. That road ends at our house and an old abandoned coal lot. The sound drew closer, every crackle of gravel sharp enough to feel, and then abruptly halted. No engine cut off, no doors opened, no voices, only silence. I muted the television and waited, holding my breath for headlights to illuminate the walls. Nothing. The darkness persisted, leaving me uneasy. After a moment, I decided it was simply someone turning around and went back inside, securing the door once more. Saturday night had come to an end. I tried to assure myself everything was all right, yet my gaze remained glued to the screen. About half an hour later, I heard it. 2 knocks, slow and deliberate, at the back door. Instantly, every muscle in my body tensed. No one uses that door. It stands 4 feet off the ground with no steps leading up. It has a small porch, just large enough for 2 chairs and some stacked firewood. I seized the rifle and positioned it across my lap, staring at the wall as if I could see through it. The knocking resumed, the same slow rhythm, not a call to enter, but rather testing the walls. I remained motionless, suppressing my breaths. Then it stopped. I counted 2 minutes, maybe longer, before I rose to check. Gliding silently into the kitchen, I switched off the lights and tilted one blind just enough to peer outside. It was empty. The yard stretched pale underneath a thin slice of moon, the trees appearing hunched and black as a cave. The porch floorboards were bare. That's when I recognized something strange. The motion light by the shed hadn't activated. It typically flickers on even for deer or raccoons, and now, nothing. Just darkness. I backed away from the window and switched off all the lights inside. The television went dark, leaving only the fridge's hum and my breathing. I reached for my phone on the counter. Dead. The charger had slipped loose. Perfect timing. I briefly entertained the thought of fleeing, cutting through the yard and hitting the trail to the logging road. But that meant leaving the house completely unguarded. Instead, I sat on the hallway floor, rifle across my lap, where I could see both doors, and waited. For what felt like ages, it was silent, long enough that I nearly convinced myself I had imagined the entire ordeal. Then, the front door handle turned, just a flicker, as if someone were testing it, yet lightly enough that maybe I wouldn't notice. My chest tightened. I raised the rifle and aimed at the door, but my hands trembled uncontrollably. The knob stilled, then a heavy silence ensued before footsteps echoed on the porch. They moved slowly, methodically. They approached the window. I didn't wait. I dashed for the back door, slid the bolt, and leaped into the yard barefoot, landing hard, in the dirt. The cold stung at my feet. But I didn't slow down. I aimed to circle the shed, hit the tree line, and follow the trail to the old road. The woods consumed me almost immediately, branches clawing at my arms while roots would snag my toes. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my heartbeat sounded like footsteps behind me. About halfway down the trail, I dared a glance back. A figure stood on the porch, a shadow where the light should have illuminated, head tilted toward the trees. I refused to look again. I sprinted until my lungs screamed, and the trail spat me out onto the logging road like a pale scar through the trees when I spotted headlights. a pickup creeping toward me from the ridge. I waved frantically. The truck slowed abruptly, tires grinding against the gravel. An older man, someone I'd seen at the feed store a few times, looked at me, and from his expression, I sensed he already knew something was amiss. No questions were asked. He merely urged me to get into the truck. We drove back together. The yard lay vacant. The porch was empty. Both doors were locked, not bolted as I'd left them, but just locked, as if no one had ever been inside. I crashed at his place that night. My parents returned in the morning, pale and furious, vowing they'd never leave me alone again. Living in the Appalachians wasn't solely about being distanced from town. It was an entirely different realm of separation. My cabin settled on a narrow expanse of cleared land between two steep ridges, concealed far enough back that the gravel road leading to it resembled a forgotten path rather than a route intended for vehicles. After 12 years there, I had long since grown accustomed to the silence. I was familiar with the local wildlife, the changing seasons, and which sounds evoked which meanings. I believed I understood this place. That night commenced like any other, without anything unusual. I had dedicated most of the afternoon to fixing a section of the fence after a bear had torn through it the previous night. It had been a hefty beast, judging by the claw marks left on the boards. Following that, I split several stacks of hickory and oak to prepare for the week ahead. By sunset, my back ached and my hands were blistered, but I felt that satisfying tiredness that follows a full day's work. Once night descended, I lit the lantern and continued with my routine, that little procedure to streamline my days. I would gather firewood from the shed to the cabin, stack it by the stove, and prepare the fire for the night. It provided me with a steady task, allowing me to disengage my mind and simply focus on load, walk, stack, repeat. I was on my second armful when I heard it. 3 dull thumps, soft yet clear, as if someone was knocking with the side of their fist. Not loud, but certainly deliberate. I froze mid-stride, wood pressed tight against my chest, and turned my head to listen. It wasn't coming from the trees, nor the shed, nor an echo. It was directly beneath the cabin. Now, the place rested on stone and cinder blocks, high enough to crawl under if you were either stubborn or unfortunate. That space had always unnerved me a bit, confined and too dark. But it was where the pipes ran, and I had ventured under there previously for repairs. There were spiders, dirt, the occasional possum. Nothing extraordinary. Still clutching the firewood, I went inside, dropped my load by the stove, and retrieved my flashlight. I stepped back out and crouched by the edge of the porch, shining the light around the base, checking for any movement. Nothing, just dirt, weeds, and a couple of old boards leaning against the blocks. I bent down on one knee and pressed my ear against the siding. Nothing. Just as I was about to dismiss it as a branch or perhaps an odd settling sound in the cold, I heard it again. 3 knocks. This time closer, sharper, same rhythm, same weight behind it. That's when rational thought deserted me and stubbornness took control. I thought, could it be a raccoon or maybe a stray dog? Perhaps something more sinister if I ignore it. So I hit the ground belly first and slid beneath the porch. It wasn't comfortable. The crawl space was damp and filled with webs that clung to my arms and neck like static electricity. My shirt caught on something sharp. The chill from the dirt seeped through my jeans. But I continued onward, sweeping, the flashlight left and right, attempting not to dwell on what might be moving just out of my reach. The usual detritus lay in the space: pipes, scrap wood, an old tin bucket I had abandoned. However, right in the middle of that narrow area, perfectly centered as though precisely measured, sat a wooden box. It appeared handmade, rough pine boards hastily hammered together, as if someone had constructed it in a rush or lacked proper skill. Yet, it was solid. No dust coated it, no spiders. It was out of place, and I instinctively knew it didn't belong. I stared at it for 30 seconds before crawling closer. I noticed the lid was nailed secure. The second notable detail was the top of the box, bowing outward as if something inside was straining against it. That prompted me to stop. I hesitated over whether I should touch it, yet I did. Tapping lightly with my flashlight handle, a swift 3 knocks echoed back, mirroring the force and rhythm of my own. It felt as if something, or someone, was waiting patiently inside. My body tensed, completely immobilized. Then my mind caught up, and panic set in as I scrambled back, bumping my shoulder against a support beam and scratching my rib on a nail. It didn't matter. I bolted out into the open air as if escaping a fire. I stood too quickly, nearly losing my balance, gasping for breath as one would after sprinting a mile. I couldn't tear my gaze from the dark mouth of that crawl space. No more sounds emerged. Then, I heard it again. Not from beneath the porch now, but from inside the cabin. The same knocks, the same pattern, but this time, the sound moved, like it was coursing through the walls. First the kitchen, then the hallway, and then closer, slower. It wasn't loud, yet it was unmistakable. I stepped inside, not out of desire, but rather out of necessity to determine its source. My legs felt numb, my grip on the flashlight so tight it ached, but I persisted, following the sound. It led me to the pantry. I opened the door. Just shelves, lined with jars, flour sacks, canned vegetables. Nothing stirred. Nothing appeared amiss. However, the knocking persisted, an unyielding, steady cadence, as if someone concealed behind the wall had nowhere else to be. I contemplated dismantling the boards, genuinely considering it, even reaching for the hammer positioned nearby. Still, some ingrained survival instinct I hadn't felt in years warned me against it. Not from fear, but from a sense of certainty. Whatever lay beyond that wall, I had no intention of granting it access. I slowly backed away, keeping my eyes fixated on the wall without blinking. As I reached the living room, I dropped the flashlight, snatched the axe from its spot beside the stove, and jammed it against the door handle to secure it shut. Just a small action to create a line of division between me and whatever lay on the other side. The knocking ceased, but I could still perceive it, faint, traversing through some area of the house that remained out of reach. It never turned, frantic, never accelerated, simply maintained its slow, patient rhythm. I didn't contemplate. I acted on instinct. Grabbing my truck keys, I stepped outside, devoid of clothes, food. My wallet was forgotten on the table. Fortunately, the engine roared to life on the first try, and I threw the truck into gear, speeding down the gravel road. I avoided the main route, veering through the woods on an old logging trail I hadn't traversed in years. The truck barely fit, winding through dips, stumps, and washouts. I took no notice of the branches scratching the sides or the rocks striking the undercarriage. I simply drove. Eventually, the trail deposited me into the valley. I drove until a porch light glimmered, a warm glow emanating from a farmhouse to my side. I pulled over, sat there with the engine still running, hands gripping the steering wheel. For the first time, I felt I could breathe since the beginning. I never returned, not even revealing to anyone exactly where it had been located. It was perched about halfway up a ridge in the Blue Hollow area of western North Carolina, one of those regions of Appalachia where the mountains fold tightly together as if they're trying to shut everything else out. The road leading there barely deserved the name. It was a narrow gravel path with switchbacks that felt more like a dare than a driveway. No guardrails, no signs, just a long winding ascent through trees so dense you couldn't see 10 feet off the side. By the time you hit the clearing, you felt like you had crossed into a different world, and maybe I had. The house itself wasn't terrible considering everything. It had sat empty for nearly 3 years. 2 stories, weathered wood siding, a tin roof that popped and creaked every time the temperature shifted. A long front porch extended the whole length of the place, featuring a swing on one end that looked as if it hadn't moved in ages. The boards creaked underfoot. The entire porch displayed a slight tilt, as if it had decided to lean permanently into the wind, yet it stood firm. It felt like someone hit pause on life and walked out the door. My uncle had left everything behind. Tools were neatly lined up on hooks in the shed, rows of canned beans, peaches, and who knows what else filled. The pantry and even firewood was already split and stacked just outside. I found his boots beneath the bench by the back door, still coated with dried mud on the soles. There was a pack of playing cards on the kitchen table, half a hand dealt. It was an eerie feeling in that kind of still, forgotten way, as if the house couldn't quite decide whether it wanted to be abandoned or not. But I needed a place to restart, and for the initial weeks, it worked. The quiet was deep, the kind that settled into your bones. During the day, I kept busy replacing rusting tin sheets on the roof, trimming back saplings that threatened to creep too near the foundation, hauling out a decade's worth of junk from the back of the shed. There was always something to be done. By the end of the day, I was too worn out to dwell on how alone I was. Nights were slower. I'd sit out on the porch with a lantern, just watching the darkness settle in. The trees formed a barrier just past the yard's edge. Nothing moved. No cars. No voices. Just a breeze now and then, and the buzz of insects humming like a low, constant engine. Occasionally, a coyote would cry out in the distance, high and short like a child trying to grab someone's attention. It took time before I noticed something was amiss. The first indication was the shed. One morning, I strolled out to grab some pliers, and the door was slightly ajar. Not wide, just a couple of inches, but enough to feel wrong. I always latched it, always. It had a small padlock, not for security really, just to keep it from swinging in the wind. That lock remained there, neatly attached to the latch as if nothing had disturbed it. Inside, the tools were rearranged, not stolen or knocked over, merely moved around. My hammer and saw, which had been resting on a shelf in the corner, were now side by side on the workbench, aligned and clean. The bucket of nails had been emptied into a row of glass jars sorted by size. It was the kind of thing that makes you pause mid-step. Not exactly afraid, just unsettled. I stood there staring for a minute, convincing myself I must have left the door unlatched and the wind blew it open. Perhaps I did the organizing and just forgot. I'd been living off black, coffee and 5 hours of sleep most nights. It was plausible. Strange, but plausible. But then, about a week later, the porch swing vanished. One morning, I stepped out with my coffee and simply stared at the vacant space. The chains were still there, gently swaying as if someone had just gotten up, yet the swing itself was gone, not broken, not dragged away, just absent. I searched the yard, the wood's edge, even trekked down the gravel road for 100 feet or so, thinking maybe it had fallen and rolled, or someone thought it would be amusing to take it. But I would have heard a car. Nobody hikes up there unless they're hunting, and that only occurs in the fall. It didn't make sense. A couple of nights later, I heard something outside. I was in bed, the house securely locked, when the sound roused me. Initially, I thought it was a deer in the brush, yet this wasn't the sound of thrashing or snapping branches. It was slow and deliberate, akin to footsteps, softly pressing down on the grass. I got out of bed, crossed to the window, and drew back the curtain. The porch lantern was still lit, casting a small yellow circle just beyond the front steps, and something was moving just beyond that light's reach, slow and steady, as if it were fully aware of how far the light extended. I couldn't discern any details, just enough of a shape to recognize it was human-sized and pacing in a wide arc around the house. Not rushing, not sneaking, just walking. I hardly slept that night. When morning came, I discovered a stack of stones on the porch steps. 6 stones flat and perfectly balanced, each a little smaller than the one beneath it. They were smooth like river stones, but there isn't any river near that ridge. The closest creek is down by Channing Road, and that's a couple of miles away. I didn't touch them, just stood there staring for a while before stepping over and heading to town for supplies. At the general store, I casually brought it up. "You ever get kids messing around up Blue Hollow?" I asked. The guy behind the counter, Frank, an older man with a broken hearing aid, just looked at me and shook his head. "Ain't nobody hiking that far up unless they're wanting to stay lost," he replied. That night, the footsteps returned. Same sound, same pacing. But this time, they halted right beneath my window. I held still, scarcely breathing. That soft tap, tap, tap echoed again, a sound like stone striking stone. When morning arrived, a new stack had joined the first, taller than before. I began keeping the rifle by my bed, not because I believed it would help, just because it made me feel a little more in control. On the fourth night, I resolved to see what was happening. I turned off every light in the house, left the lantern unlit, and sat in the front room with the rifle across my knees, staring out the window. The yard transformed into a realm of shifting shadows. The trees were black silhouettes against an even darker backdrop. I waited. Hours passed, and just when I began to doubt anything would show up, it emerged from the trees. No flashlight, no lantern, just a silhouette moving with an odd, fluid confidence, like it had traversed this ground countless times before. No pause, no stumbles. It was tall and thin. I never discerned a face, but its arms, they hung too low. That's what I remember most. They didn't swing naturally. They merely hung there, heavy, pale in the moonlight, almost reaching my knees. The hands moved slowly, deliberately, picking up each stone from somewhere just off the porch and stacking them one by one. No wasted movements, no sound beyond stone meeting stone. When it finished, it remained still for a moment. Then it turned back toward the woods and vanished, not walking away, just gone, as if it had been yanked back into the darkness. I blinked, and it was no longer there. At dawn, I packed everything I valued into the truck, which amounted to the rifle and a few clothes. That was it. I didn't even lock the house. By noon, I found myself back in town, renting a room above the bakery on Hill Street. When people inquired, I said the house hadn't been what I expected. It needed much work, roof leaks, bad wiring, that sort of thing. But I never disclosed what truly transpired. I've spent my entire life in a hollow winding through Clay County, Kentucky. This place is home in an unwavering way where folks settle in and only leave when absolutely forced. I was no exception. Nothing had compelled me to go. I work in maintenance for a telecom company, covering nearly everything since I'm the sole individual assigned to the whole mountain region. My primary site is an old tower perched on Backbone Ridge. Every morning, it's a long, slow ride up the fire road. The trees close in so tightly overhead that you lose sight of the sky. I take my ATV, pack my gear, and get to work. The tower itself is a beast, rusty and pieced together with old bolts, plastic straps, and any scrap that keeps it functioning. Sometimes I think it's more reliant on habit than hardware. Yet it plays a critical role, transmitting signals across 6 counties. If it fails, half the mountain goes silent. Thus, I run diagnostics, check voltage, swap out fried components, give it the occasional kick, and head back down before dark. There's no reception up there, nor any radio. Once I get halfway up, the world just halts. No voices, no traffic, merely the hum of metal and wood so still that it penetrates your skin if you linger too long. Last October, I started spotting strange logs in the system. The pings were minimal, barely formed data packets, malformed, with no return paths. It was as if something was attempting to reach out to the tower but didn't speak the right language. Nothing matched any device signatures we'd previously used. I sent the data over to Lexington and flagged it as unknown. Their reaction was as good as a shrug, probably just stray gear or older trackers, maybe experimental wildlife tags. Nothing to be concerned about. Hence, I let it slide. 3 days later, while riding the trail up, I came across something peculiar. bright red yarn tied around a pine branch right off the main path. It looked new, bright, with no frays or dirt. It stood out in a manner that nothing usually does up there. I left it be, thinking it could be a forestry marker or some sort of land survey. The following day, I stumbled upon a second ribbon, this one tied around a sapling at a switchback. A third appeared a little further down the slope, nearly concealed, under a patch of laurel. That one compelled me to pause, too far off the trail and too purposeful. By the fifth day, I couldn't dismiss them anymore, so I began to track them, not all at once, not in a straight line. They weren't evenly spaced. Some were just visible through the foliage, while I had to backtrack for others. However, each one lured me deeper down the slope into uncharted parts of the woods. There were no deer prints, no old beer cans or shotgun shells, just silence and those tiny red ribbons. I counted 10 of them, and right after the 10th, something shifted. The air changed, felt wrong, not merely off, but musty. It held a thick, sticky sweetness reminiscent of motor oil mingled with rotting fruit left in a hot car. I've hunted and dressed deer in the cold, but this wasn't animal rot. It was chemical and wrong, triggering an instinctual stiffness. I lifted my shirt over my face and ventured into the hollow. That's when I beheld the camp. A single canvas tent, old and sagging, caved in from the middle as if someone had been sleeping in it for too long and had never left. Mud had eaten into the seams. Scattered about were rusted cans, a blackened, frying pan, and a clouded jug filled with something dark and viscous. However, the bones were the centerpiece. They weren't simply lying around. They were arranged. Circles, spirals, piles, small pieces, resembling raccoon or stray cat remains. Some were burnt, others bleached white, while some were tied together with more of that red yarn, bundled like little gifts. I stood frozen, my stomach clenched, fingers twitching. I retrieved my phone and snapped 3 pictures before deciding to leave. Then I halted, realizing that 2 ribbons had vanished. Gone, not snapped or fallen, just absent as if they had never existed. I was not lost. I knew the route I had taken. I began retracing my steps, finally finding a single piece of yarn amongst the leaves, frayed like someone had cut it cleanly. That's when I began to really move. I didn't run, but my legs didn't linger. I made it back to the fire road, just as dusk settled. When I reached my ATV, it wouldn't start. I turned the key. Nothing, not even a click. The battery wasn't dead. It felt as if something had taken the life out of the machine. I ultimately ended up pushing it all the way down. 2 miles of dirt and rocks. Once I regained reception, I called Travis, my cousin. He arrived without questions, tossed the ATV into his truck, and we drove home in silence. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I shut my eyes, those little bundles of bones replayed in my mind. The following morning, I patched up the ATV, loaded my rifle, a .308 I keep cleaned and squared away, and rode back up, needing to confirm I hadn't imagined it. However, everything, the ribbons, the bones, the smell, was gone. No tent, no bones, no scent, yet the ground appeared disturbed. Drag marks in the soft soil indicated something heavy had been removed, but it hadn't been rushed. It seemed deliberate, as if it wanted me to see where it had been. I didn't report it, not wanting to explain it in a company portal. That night, something knocked on my window. 3 gentle knocks. Not the door, but the rear window. I reside alone. No kids. The closest neighbor lives 3 miles away, and I always keep my yard tidy. My porch light had already been on, so I seized my shotgun and stepped out onto the porch. But there was nothing, no movement, no footprints. Yet right at my feet, on the mat, was a bundle, a chunk of antler worn smooth, wrapped in a red yarn bow. I called Travis again. He drove up, rifle in hand, and we sat together in the living room, coffee mugs in one hand, guns in the other, watching the tree line. Around 3 a.m, we heard it sing. Not lyrics, just long, slow tones, like a dozen voices harmonizing in different melodies at once. The sound originated from behind the shed, where the woods dipped into a thicket of oaks. The noise sent chills through my skin in a way I cannot accurately describe. Travis appeared ready to walk toward it, but I seized his arm and implored, "No, you're not." We bided our time until dawn. That afternoon, I purchased 6 trail cameras, top tier, infrared, motion activated, with a 30-yard detection range. I ringed the cabin with them and placed 2 more along the tower trail, needing to verify my sanity. The next morning, I checked the recordings. Every camera had glitched at precisely 3:17 a.m., capturing exactly 11 seconds of static before a few frozen frames. Something moved through the woods, tall, black shapes, too tall, with limbs resembling bending branches. One silhouette halted, on my porch, right at the wayward edge of the frame. You couldn't see its face, merely its arms, long and low, as though they lacked joints. Another camera captured a figure crawling along the woodpile, naked, pale, with a mouth far too wide. I submitted the footage to Lexington, but they replied with a stock message, something about firmware issues and a request to reinstall. I didn't respond. The following night came with sounds drawing closer. The rhythms sharpened, almost musical, yet warped. I fired a shot into the trees just to disrupt it. The noise halted instantly, but a few moments later, I picked up footsteps. Slow, methodical, neither charging nor sneaking. It was like someone was pacing the perimeter of my yard, challenging me to look out. I stood outside with my shotgun until the sky turned pink with morning. The next day, I went to the tower for one last check. It was wrapped every which way. Every rung on the ladder, every handhold, every bolt was tied with red yarn and arranged into neat bows. The access panel hung open, revealing a pile of birds stacked discreetly within. Every eye missing, not torn asunder, merely placed. I contacted Lexington and quit that same afternoon. No excuses, no explanations, just said I was done. They sent someone else to cover my territory. 2 weeks later, he vanished. They located his ATV up on the ridge, engine still warm. No prints, no signs of struggle, just gone. Now, I live in Corbin, in a second-floor apartment with neighbors on both sides and cars outside. I don't hike, I don't camp. I've worked in some extraordinary places, crawling through collapsed mine shafts in Nevada with barely a foot of clearance, setting up tripods on wind-whipped ridgelines in Colorado where you can see for miles, and even sleeping inside an old water treatment plant in Missouri during a snowstorm, completely without power, windows, just a dusty concrete box with the continuous sound of dripping pipes. I grew accustomed to solitude in areas where most people wouldn't dare to step. The reason why what happened in Kentucky still haunts me. This incident took place in 2003. A subcontractor I hadn't previously dealt with contacted me, seeking someone for a survey in a remote patch of eastern Kentucky. They mentioned potential development for ecotourism, trails, maybe some cabins. Nothing seemed to raise alarms. I often receive sporadic clients. They sent through coordinates, a topo map, and a brief, 3 days solo in the woods, mapping natural features and flagging anything unusual. It sounded like a dream assignment, remote, a blank canvas, and no one hovering over my shoulder. I loaded my truck and set out the following morning. As I delved deeper into the hills, signs of civilization rapidly dwindled. No gas stations, no mailboxes, even old rusted tractors were absent, just trees. The main road transitioned to gravel, and then dirt, before it disappeared completely. I unloaded the ATV for the last few miles, the trail barely used, overgrown with scattered branches and decaying leaves. I rode about 5 miles in before finding a flat area by a stream. A mere clearing, decent drainage, a couple of flat rocks to sit on, and trees well spaced for hanging gear. I made camp there. The first day went smoothly. Long hikes, pleasant weather, and no signs of humanity anywhere. I logged numerous coordinates, created terrain sketches, and flagged a few peculiar tree clusters that might interfere with future trail routes. Typical fieldwork. But near sundown, I noticed something unusual. At the edge of a slope, half buried in moss and dirt, was a little stone marker, roughly 2 feet tall. I nearly overlooked it, as it appeared to have been there for quite some time. Initially, I assumed it was some old boundary stone, but it didn't resemble any I'd encountered before. It was rounded, worn smooth, and faint carvings decorated. The sides, rough spirals and angular cuts, like someone had taken a rock and scored it with a nail. I snapped a few photos, marked its location, and continued on my way, presuming it might be part of an old homestead marker or a local custom I wasn't familiar with. That night, as I was boiling water for dinner, I heard a sound. It wasn't from an animal. I was well acquainted with the sounds of raccoons, coyotes, and various creatures traveling through the underbrush. This was different, a long dragging noise, as if something heavy was being pulled across the ground. I froze and waited. It occurred again, a persistent scrape, now closer, perhaps 20 or 30 feet behind the tent. I picked up my flashlight, turned it on, and stepped outside, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, and the sound had ceased, like it had become aware that I was listening. The morning brought a circle of small rocks in the dirt near where the sound had come from, meticulously, arranged, not random. In the center was a piece of tree bark, stripped clean, about the length of my forearm, with that same spiral etched deep into it. It didn't appear old. The edges were still sharp. Habit propelled me to seal it in a plastic bag and place it in my pack. Day 2 arrived, and I ventured further into the forest, discovering another stone, identical in height and shape, identical peculiar carvings. This one was nestled within a thicket, almost concealed. Clearing the brush, I found it warm, as though it had been resting under the sun, although the canopy above was dense, allowing little light to penetrate. I scanned the surrounding ground for any signs of others. No footprints or boot prints, merely that marker in silence. That night, I set a perimeter around my tent. A classic field trick, fishing lines strung between trees with tin cans attached. I didn't even make it to midnight when the entire line rattled. Not a gentle breeze, not a few cans, but every single one clanged at once. I leapt out with my flashlight and knife in hand. Inspecting the strings revealed that every line had been cut. Clean, straight cuts as if made with scissors. At dawn, I struck camp and moved south about half a mile. I didn't want to abandon the job halfway, but had no desire to linger either. During the day, I came across claw marks etched into a tree, 4 long gashes about 6 feet off the ground, deep and precise. They weren't made by bears, as my experience taught me the difference. These were too smooth, almost resembling art. They tapered off at the ends and felt warm to the touch, just like the stones. That night, I avoided lying, down, sitting up in the tent with my headlamp shining down and the knife resting on my lap. Every little noise made my heart jump. At around 2 a.m., whispers started to permeate the air. Not discernible words, just air swirling like breath trying to form sentences. The whispers encircled the tent, low and continuous. Unable to bear it any longer, I stepped outside, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other. I spotted movement, a shadow darting rapidly between 2 trees. I dashed after it and reached the scene as it vanished. However, on a nearby tree, another spiral had been gouged deep into the bark, with a smear of blood beneath it. That was enough. I turned and fled, not pausing to think, just running back, toward camp. When I halted to check my GPS, I found I hadn't traveled far at all. I was back at my second camp, the same location, identical trees, identical rocks. I had not gone in circles, and I knew how to navigate direction in the woods. Yet somehow, I had returned to my initial location. Then the whispering resumed, now right behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. I didn't wait to find out. Abandoning the ATV, I bolted downhill, crashing through underbrush until my legs gave out. I found a rock ledge and huddled beneath it until daylight, knife clenched tightly, eyes wide open. By midday, I stumbled across a narrow dirt path too. even to be natural, and I followed it until I encountered a shed, old wooden construction with a heavily reinforced steel padlock on the door. Next to it was a stake with a laminated tag indicating the company that had hired me. Later, I discovered that company didn't exist. No website, no business registry, nothing. It was as if it had never been real. Later in the evening, I ran into an older man hunting squirrels, smelling like kerosene. He didn't pose a single inquiry. He merely offered me a ride to the nearest gas station. I called a friend for a pickup. Back at home, I attempted to send the photos and GPS files. However, the email bounced back. The website vanished and the SD card corrupted. All files gone. The bark I had sealed within a bag was missing from my pack. These days, in the dead of night, I hear it again. 3 soft clicks, followed by silence, and then 3 more. Occasionally it occurs just outside my house. I no longer open the curtains, and I haven't taken another job in Kentucky since. My parents had left for the weekend to see my aunt in Crestwood, which was a good 3 hours away. They offered to take me along, but I opted to stay because of school. I had done it before, so it didn't seem like a big deal. Our house sat way back in the hills, far enough that GPS barely functioned, and most maps didn't even mark the road. If a car passed by, it was either the mail truck or someone who was very, very lost. Friday began normally. After coming home from school, I tossed my bag onto the kitchen chair and spread my homework across the table. In an hour, I finished my work, heated up some frozen lasagna, and scrolled through my phone until my eyelids felt heavy. I didn't mind the quiet. It was the kind of silence you adapt to when living out here. Occasionally, you'd hear a distant dog barks or perhaps a truck rumbling down the highway miles away. But that was pretty much it. Before going to bed, I made my usual rounds, locking the doors, pulling the curtains, turning off the lights except for the lamp by the couch. That's what my mum always said. Keep a light on so it looks like someone's home. Then I crawled into bed, snuggled up with my phone, and drifted off. The first night was completely normal. However, everything changed on the second night. It began around 9 p.m. I was back on the couch in my pajamas, aimlessly scrolling through TikTok when I heard it, a knock at the back door. Just one knock, loud enough to echo through the house. It sliced through the quiet like a gunshot. I froze with my phone in hand, staring toward the kitchen where the back door was located. My first thought was of my parents. Perhaps something had happened and they returned early. But no, that didn't add up. They would have called, and even if they hadn't, they couldn't have made that drive so quickly. I remained still for a full minute, just sitting there, my ears straining for any sound. Footsteps on the porch, a voice calling my name, nothing. Just the fridge humming and the tick of the wall clock behind me. Finally, I reassured myself it was nothing, maybe a branch that fell, or a raccoon climbed up the steps. We frequently had wildlife around, sometimes bears, but they typically stuck to the woods. I got up anyway to check the lock on the back door, pulled the curtain shut, and returned to the couch. 30 minutes later came another knock, this time from the front door. I didn't even breathe. I merely stared at the door as though it might burst open uncontrollably. Nobody knocks on your door out here. Not at night. People who live this far back in the hills don't just drop by. My parents had drilled that into me countless times. If someone shows up after dark, it's not because they're lost. I waited, hoping for something that could clarify the situation. Car headlights in the driveway, maybe the crunch of tires on gravel. Nothing. Just the immovable weight of silence that felt even more oppressive than before. Then came the third knock, not from the front nor the back, but from the side door, the one in the kitchen that leads down to the woods. 3 knocks, 3 separate doors. That's when it hit me. Whoever was out there wasn't lost. They were circling the house, trying every entrance. My stomach dropped so hard I felt nauseous. I stood up slowly, reached for the light switch, then froze. If I turned it on, they'd know where I was, if they didn't already. I backed down the hallway as quietly as I could, my socked feet barely making any sound on the floor. My phone was still in my pocket, and I clutched it so tightly my knuckles ached. I contemplated calling my parents but couldn't bring myself to do it. Saying it aloud, "Someone is here," would make it all too real. I was halfway to my room when I heard the porch screen door creak open, an unmistakable sound I can recall vividly. It's an old door, and whenever it's pushed fully, the spring groans and stretches before slamming shut. I heard every bit of it. The prolonged squeal followed by the soft thud when it closed. Every muscle in my body went rigid, frozen in place. I stood in the hallway, listening to my own heartbeat thrumming so loudly it drowned out all other sounds. Then nothing. No footsteps, no voice, just silence again. When I finally moved, it was instinctive. I dashed into my room, shoved the dresser across the floor until it wedged tightly against the doorframe, nearly collapsing behind me. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped my phone while trying to unlock it. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing. Just me, sitting on the floor in darkness, holding my breath until my chest burned, straining to hear beyond the blood rushing through my ears. Eventually, I began to believe maybe it was over. Maybe whoever it was had left. I even started to type a text to my mum. Then I heard it, a slow, dragging scrape against the siding outside. It started at the corner of the house and crept toward my window. The sound of metal scratching wood was akin to nails on a chalkboard. Not fast, but slow and deliberate, the kind of noise that makes your teeth hurt. Then it halted. A full minute passed before a voice emerged, calm and low, just loud enough to seep through the glass. "Why'd you lock your doors?" My throat constricted. My fingers trembled so violently, I could barely tap the screen. The voice continued, this time closer, right below my window. "I saw you through the glass." That shattered something within me. I slammed my thumb onto my mum's contact and pressed the phone to my ear, praying she'd pick up. She answered on the second ring, and all I could get out was, "Please come home, please come home." Without hesitation, she replied, "I'm coming," then hung up. Outside, the porch steps creaked again. Faint, yet I heard it. Whoever it was hadn't left toward the road. They were moving toward the woods. I remained by the door, every muscle taut like a coiled spring, ready to run if necessary. Time dragged on for what felt like hours until I finally spotted headlights sweeping through the trees. My dad's truck roared down the gravel driveway, engine howling. The second it halted, he jumped out with a shotgun, calling my name. I shoved the dresser aside so quickly it toppled over, rushing into his arms as though my life depended on it. By then, the individual who had haunted me was gone. The following morning, we discovered undeniable proof. Boot prints in the mud circling the house, large ones. They didn't lead back to the driveway. Instead, they ventured into the forest, toward the rocky slope where the trail disappeared into endless woods. That was the last time I ever stayed home alone in those hills. My parents carved out a plan to visit family in Tennessee, leaving me behind to keep an eye on the house. Just 3 nights. That was a trivial thing for someone like me, raised in the middle of nowhere with plenty of solo experiences. Our home sat deep within the Appalachian hills, far enough that the road abandoned pavement a mile before reaching our driveway. After that, it transitioned into hard-packed dirt, winding up the hill as though someone had painstakingly dragged it there. Cell service vanished the moment you navigated that bend by the creek, meaning once you were home, the rest of the world might as well not exist. To be truthful, I liked it that way. Some people panic when left alone out there, but for me, there's a comfort in that silence. It's normal. I was raised in that profound kind of quiet. It's so complete. It's almost as if sound couldn't exist within it. Eventually, you stop even registering it. And when you do finally notice, it feels like something's not quite right. The first night passed with ease. I dined on leftovers, tossed on some DVDs, stretched out on the couch, and let the screen's light fill the living area. Everything felt the same as any other night. No abnormal sensations. Nothing to make me feel watched or anxious until around 2 a.m. when I jolted awake to what sounded like the front door opening. It wasn't loud, just a gentle click of metal sliding against metal, and then the slow, careful creak of wood. I froze, head half off the pillow, eyes straining toward the dark edge of the room, questioning if I'd conjured it. The sound lasted a few seconds, then silence dropped. I remained still for what felt like an eternity, waiting for footsteps or any movement. The house gave nothing but silence. I assured myself it was simply the wind. The latch on that door was older than me, and the frame swells when it's damp. People say houses shift at night, right? So I believed it, or at least tried to convince myself of it. Eventually, I sank back down. At some point later, I drifted off again. The next morning, the front door remained locked, with no scratches on the wood to suggest anyone had intruded. That comforted me throughout the day, long enough for the sun to dip behind the ridge and for the dark to roll in like a tide. The second night felt distinctly different from the very beginning. I couldn't pinpoint why. Everything appeared ordinary. All sounds fell quiet, which meant not sounding like anything at all. Yet something within me felt off. When I ventured onto the back porch to smoke, I noticed it. The chairs weren't where I had left them. They were oriented toward the woods, both turned, no longer side by side, but facing outward like someone had repositioned them to watch the tree line. I scrutinized them for a solid minute, trying to justify the scenario. Perhaps I had shifted them and forgotten. Perhaps the wind had blown them around a little, but the gusts would have pushed them into the railing, not perfectly facing the trees as though two people were gathering to view a performance. That assertion clung to me like a burr as I trekked back inside. Every door and window was locked. I even checked the basement, which felt ridiculous while doing it, yet I needed to be sure. I grabbed a kitchen chair and wedged it under the front. Dr. Handle like you see in old movies. It made me feel clever, like I had a safety net. I kept the television on low in the living room while I resumed my position on the couch. The gun cabinet was next door, and I reminded myself that if anything happened, I was fine. Everything was secured, and the rifle was merely 20 steps away. That was sufficient. Eventually, I succumbed to sleep. This time, an aroma awakened me. Not a sound, but a smell like damp earth. It was heavy, as though someone had conspired to dump a bag of wet soil directly onto the floor. The scent hit me the instant I opened my eyes, and before I processed what it was, I acknowledged the cold. The front door stood wide open. The chair I had propped against the handle was still upright, as if untouched, yet the door behind it was flung wide open to the limit. Cold air wrapped around my feet. I hadn't heard anyone depart. I had heard nothing at all. My hands shook so violently that I almost dropped my phone while checking for a signal. None, of course. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and lunged, straight for the cabinet. Dad's trusty 30-30 lever-action rifle sat inside. I loaded it, positioned myself against the wall, and pointed it at that door until morning's arrival. When daylight spilled in, I chuckled, not from humor, but because I'd rather laugh than consider the implications of the smell by the door and how that chair hadn't shifted a single inch. Forcing myself outside, I surveyed the property as if everything were normal. That's when I spotted them. Footprints. Small bare feet, perhaps a size 6 or 7, pressed deeply into the mud by the porch steps. They encircled the railing twice before disappearing into the trees. I trailed them until they vanished among the roots. I was uncertain if it was the size of those footprints or their deep marks that unsettled me. It seemed as if whoever made them had been hauling something heavy. That night, I didn't even attempt to relax. I secured everything again, wedging the chair under the door, and sequestered myself in the kitchen so I could monitor every entrance simultaneously. Every light in the house was aglow, and my grasp never strayed far from the rifle. Around midnight, I noticed movement on the porch. At first, I thought my eyes were deceiving me, but then the chair moved, slowly scraping across the boards as though something nudged it from behind. It shifted again and again, not pulled but pushed, cautiously, as if someone wanted to ensure I noticed. I anticipated a shadow, a face, anything, in the glass, but found nothing there. The scraping halted. The silence that followed felt worse than the noise itself. I can't recall how I grabbed the keys, only the sensation of sprinting, boots hammering against the floor, rifle slung over my shoulder. I refused to look back when I yanked open the truck door. I didn't cast a glance at the porch. I hit the gas so hard the tires spat gravel into the trees, racing down that dirt road as though my life depended on it. The next morning, I returned with my neighbor. He didn't utter much, but the expression on his face as he beheld the porch told me I wasn't going mad. Every chair had vanished. We discovered them stacked in the woods about 30 yards back, not tossed about or broken, but stacked neatly, perfectly balanced, 7 chairs high, like some totem reaching for the canopy above. I abstained from spending another night, packed a bag, locked the door, and waited in town until my parents arrived. At the end of a rugged, winding dirt road sat a little cabin. It wound so deeply into the hills that I stopped spotting mailboxes after the first mile, surrounded by dense woods on either side, branches looming toward the road as if attempting to push me back, nature acting as the gatekeeper of the place. By the moment I arrived at that narrow, dim clearing where the cabin rested, it didn't seem like I had arrived anywhere. It felt rather as though I had been swallowed. Ray, the owner, waited perched on the porch, clad in a thin, weathered jacket. His beard appeared almost silver in the fading light. He offered no warmth in his welcome, merely extending a weathered set of keys, saying, "You'll be fine here. Just remember to keep the doors locked at night." There was no comfort in his tone, and his gaze flickered nervously to the tree line, almost as if something were likely to answer back. I remember thinking how odd that felt, but cheap rent was hard to resist. Stepping inside, the cabin was hollowed, stripped down to its very bones. There was one bedroom barely spacious enough for a bed and a kitchen so narrow you had to sidestep to pass through. Every floorboard creaked, sometimes subtly, sometimes with lingering groans. Daylight seeped through the cracks near the baseboards. No insulation. If you pressed your palm against the wall, you could feel the cold night's chill seeping in. After years of being cramped in stuffy city apartments, though, the drafts didn't seem unbearable. At the back of the cabin, a narrow hallway led to 3 doors, one for the bedroom, one for the bathroom, and then a third door, thin and painted the same dull yellow as the hallway. Initially, it appeared as a mere closet, but when I attempted to open it, there was nothing. No doorknob, just a keyhole. I inquired about it before Ray departed. He narrowed his eyes and remarked, "It's an old storage door, leads into the adjacent cabin, locked from either side. Just pretend it's part of the wall." His tone struck me as more defensive than casual, but I dropped the topic. The first few weeks passed in serene oddity. Visit for the peace and stay for the solitude, right? During the day, the atmosphere felt tranquil, with bird songs floating through the cracks, a distant fox yelping occasionally. Yet, I had no cell signal. If I wanted to reach anyone, it meant a 15-minute drive up a ridge and positioning the phone just right to catch 2 bars. A minor inconvenience, yet liberating. The first knock arrived around dinner time. I was seated at the kitchen table, idly chewing on noodles and skimming through a novel when I heard it. A subtle, dull knock resonating from the end of the hall. Not an emphatic thump, but rather something lightly tapping against wood. 2 soft knocks. I froze, listening intently. Then I set the book down and took a few cautious steps toward the hallway, my heart racing. A pale, shifting light slipped beneath the yellow door. It flickered like lantern light swaying back and forth. I didn't lean in closer. Instead, I held still. No voices, no footsteps. just silence. Then that glow extinguished, darkening the hall once more. That night, I barely managed to sleep. I awoke 3 times, each instance hearing faint noises from the same spot. Fabric brushing, something dragging, a soft thud against the wall. Slow, deliberate, not hurried, yet undeniably there. It morphed into a nightly routine. Every evening after sunset, something stirred behind that door. The house fell silent. My muscles would begin to relax, then creak, slide. Slow weight shifting. During daylight, nothing disrupted the solid front. It was as if the door led to a dimension that vanished with the sun and filled up again once nightfall enveloped the space. One night, I nearly knocked back, but an instinct warned me it would only trigger something unstoppable. Then came the crash, a mid-fall night. I had been asleep when a jostle of glasses rattled in the cupboard jolted me awake. I froze, frenetic. Silence followed. Eventually, I grasped my flashlight and ventured down the hallway step by step. The yellow door lay wide open. My breath caught, a chill breeze wafting out toward me. I illuminated the space within, a small, stale room with bare walls, and a thin, stained mattress in the center. No blanket, no pillow, just a distinct, deep imprint lingering where someone had lain. The only entrance or exit was through my hallway. I called 911. My voice was low, rushed, and ragged. I meticulously checked every corner of the cabin, closets, under the bed. No one was there. Whoever had occupied that room had vanished. When the deputy arrived, he scanned through the place, slow and methodical, looking through the hallway, the open door, and then outside. When I questioned about Ray, he shrugged with a nonchalant expression. "No answer on his phone," he replied. The following morning, I drove to the post office, asking the clerk if she had heard anything. She raised her brows, informing me she hadn't seen him in months. "Guess he moved on," she said. Her tone felt vague and unsettling. Back at the cabin, I suffered through a week of sleeplessness. Every creak felt loaded with implication. I shoved a hefty bookcase against that yellow door as an extra precaution. Yet nightly, I still heard it. A brush, a scrape, slow and methodical, fingers tracing the wood, ceasing as soon as I flicked the light on. I managed to endure 7 more nights. Then one morning before dawn, as I lingered in the grey stillness, I gathered my keys and few belongings and left. I was 34 when I moved into the cabin on Hollow Ridge. There's only one way in or out, an old gravel road that climbs the side of the ridge, attempting to shake off whoever is driving it. The first time I drove up, I distinctly remember feeling like the world slowly peeled away behind me. Cell signal disappeared halfway up. Then the pavement ended. The only other vehicle I encountered that day was a rusted-out truck with moss growing on the windshield, half sunk in the brush by the turnoff. Just before the final incline, there stood a crooked old mailbox, rusted and half swallowed by weeds, leaning as if it had just given up. That was the last indication of anything human. Beyond that, it was all trees and silence. The cabin is situated about 3/4 of the way up the ridge, gracefully tucked behind a curve where the forest opens a bit. It's very quiet up there. Really quiet. The kind of quiet where you can actually hear your own thoughts colliding. I like that. I still do most days. At that time, it was precisely what I needed. Space from people, noise, and everything. I had been there nearly a year by that point, long enough for the trails behind the cabin to feel familiar underfoot, long enough to know which patches remained soggy after rain and which trees dropped branches even on calm days. My closest neighbor was Ray, a retired logger who lived about 2 miles down the slope. He couldn't see his place from mine. Too much timber in between. I'd see him maybe once a month, if that. Apart from that, it was just me, the cabin, and whatever resided in the surrounding woods. That particular night was cold. Not quite snowy cold, but definitely chilly enough to see your breath. I had let the fire burn a little lower than usual while reading. Around midnight, I thought it best to step outside and fetch a few more logs from the stack. I didn't bother with a coat, just slipped on my boots and stepped out onto the porch. That's when I observed it. Off at the edge of the ridge, just beyond where the clearing dropped into the trees, there was this glow. Not bright, not sharp like a flashlight or headlights. It was soft, almost fuzzy around the edges. It moved slowly and steadily. Initially, I thought maybe moonlight was catching some mist drifting between the trees, but it wasn't fog. It didn't shift or waver. It moved as if someone was carrying it. The light floated just inside the tree line, following the edge of the clearing. The branches and underbrush brushed through it, but it didn't flicker or dim. That part unnerved me. Typically, when someone walks through the woods with a light, it bobs and jerks a bit. This didn't do that. It glided, completely silent. No footsteps, no crunching leaves, just that glow moving along, as if it had nowhere urgent to be. Then it stopped. Not a gradual stop, not dimming out. It just froze. I waited, expecting someone to step out or perhaps call over. I even whispered, "Hello," once, just to see what might happen. Nothing. The light remained there, perfectly still. Then, it was gone. Just like that. A switch flipped off. I stood there for a time after that, arms crossed against the cold, eyes scanning the trees. Finally, I retreated inside, dumped the firewood by the stove, and sat down with a cup of tea that I suddenly didn't want. I didn't go to bed. I kept replaying what I'd witnessed in my mind, trying to convince myself it wasn't that strange. Perhaps it was a camper, or maybe Ray had company. Someone could have easily gotten lost. A dozen maybes raced in my mind. None felt entirely convincing. The following morning, I walked down to the creek to clear my head. There was a little footbridge that crossed it, nothing more than 2 planks nailed together. On the far bank, where the mud tends to stay soft most of the year, I spotted prints, boot prints, fresh ones. They were large, deep, the type you'd expect from a heavy work boot. And they weren't mine. Mine are lighter. I hadn't crossed the creek in at least a week. The prints trailed along the bank for a bit, then turned into the trees. I followed them slowly and cautiously, as if the woods might answer a question I hadn't yet asked. Then, the prints just stopped, not smeared out, not faded, just gone. One moment they were there, full heel and toe. In the next, nothing. I circled around, scanning the ground, thinking maybe the person had backtracked in their own footprints, but the earth was soft enough that any double steps or shifts would be evident. Yet there was nothing. It was as if they had vanished mid-stride. I stood there for an extended time, eventually backing out the way I'd entered, unsure of what to make of it. That night, I opted not to go outside. I remained indoors, lights dimmed, curtains open just enough to see the tree line. I told myself I was being cautious. In reality, I just wished not to be taken by surprise. Around midnight, the glow returned. This time, it was lower, closer to the creek. It moved in the same smooth manner, unaffected by its surroundings. I watched it glide between the trunks until it reached a spot directly across from the cabin. Then it halted once more. No movements, no flicker, just watching. I'm unsure how long I remained there, staring. At some point, my neck began to ache and my tea went cold, but I didn't move, didn't blink often, I just watched. Then, around 3 a.m, I heard it, a creak from the front steps. It was slow and subtle, as if someone had shifted their weight onto the board, weighing whether to take the next step. I didn't move, didn't take a deep breath. I merely listened. There was no knock, no rattle of the handle, no scraping, tapping, or voice. Just that presence, like something or someone was standing there inches from my door, waiting. Another board creaked, a tiny groan, then silence again. I remained at the table until daylight turned everything blue. When I finally summoned the courage to open the door, The yard looked normal. Dried leaves, a few birds, the wind rustling through the trees. Nothing out of place. I'm a welder and have been for over 10 years. I grew up just outside Knoxville, flitting between various jobs until my cousin Caleb used some connections to get me steady employment on an expansion project for a dam close to Ellison Lake. The job was great. Union pay, decent hours, nothing extravagant, but enough to keep worries at bay. They offered shared crew housing right near the job site, but I declined. 4 grown men crammed into a 2-bedroom trailer. No thanks. I value my space, especially after 10 hours of arc flashes and grinding noises. I can't sleep with others, breathing near me. Instead, I went searching and found a trailer a few miles out, tucked away in the woods. Rent was reasonable, $300 flat, with utilities included. The owner had moved to Florida but continued renting it out through his nephew. The whole deal felt like one of those too-good-to-be-true situations. The place sat about 6 miles, off the main road. You pass a dusty gas station with a single working pump, followed by a leaning Pentecostal church that seemed to have lost its congregation ages ago. After that, the road transforms into gravel, then dirt, before becoming barely wide enough for one vehicle. GPS abandoned me halfway there. It was as though it gave up entirely. The trailer was nothing remarkable. Faded siding, a few steps leading up to a skewed porch. But it was peaceful, real peaceful. Trees surrounded it so closely that it felt like it had been dropped into the middle of nowhere. Initially, I enjoyed it, might have even loved it. I'd return home, chop some firewood, eat whatever I managed to defrost, sit by the stove and sip on a beer or 2, maybe 3. With no neighbors and no urban distractions, I felt like a solitary soul in the woods. Every Sunday, I'd haul groceries in, and aside from work, I wouldn't encounter a living soul. Cell service was practically non-existent. If I needed to make a call, I had to drive 5 miles back toward the gas station and stand in the parking lot, looking like some weirdo. Yet the forest behind the trailer gave me pause. It was not just dense, it felt uncanny. The trees compacted so closely together that they looked fused, blocking visibility beyond a foot past the initial row of trunks. Not a shred of light broke through. I once attempted shining a flashlight into it at noon, and the beam seemed to disappear as if devoured. Locals referred to it as the wall. When I inquired with Caleb about the name, he gave me this look and replied, "You don't go past it." That was the whole explanation, and he wouldn't provide any further details. I assumed it was mere superstition, one of those local legends. However, things started getting unusual. I distinctly remember returning home late one night after a double shift to find the porch light off. I always left that light illuminated, every single night, even triple-checked it every morning before heading out to the site. But there it was, dark. I assumed the bulb had blown. As I approached to change it, I noticed the cord had been cut cleanly, as if sliced with a box cutter. No frays or melted bits, just severed. I stood there staring for a full minute, feeling my skin crawl. I told myself that perhaps a weird branch had fallen, or maybe a raccoon was causing trouble. The following day, I rewired it and installed a new bulb. At lunch, I confided in Caleb about it. He merely gazed at me, took a bite of his sandwich, and said, "Stay on your side of the trees." That was it. Several days passed without any peculiarities, and then one night around 3 a.m., I awoke to utter silence. Not the ordinary kind. This was dead silence. No fridge hum, no bugs, no wind nudging the siding. Just an oppressive quiet. My body tensed as if it recognized something was amiss. Suddenly, the motion light in the back turned on. I sat up quickly. That light only activated with movement near the bottom step. It didn't flicker like it had detected a squirrel or a falling branch. It remained solidly illuminated. I got up and walked over to the back door, but didn't open it, just peered through the glass. Initially, I couldn't see anything, but soon my eyes adjusted. There was a hand resting on the second step. Just a hand. No arm, no body. Pale as chalk. Fingers slightly curled, as though someone was crouched just out of sight, deliberately keeping their hand there. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Backing away slowly, I grabbed a tire iron from under the sink and stood in the kitchen, anxious. Roughly 20 minutes later, the light switched off. The next morning, I ventured out to investigate. Nothing. No footprints, no marks on the step. Everything appeared untouched, as if that incident had never occurred. I attempted to brush it off, telling myself it was exhaustion, or perhaps an odd shadow. I stopped leaving the porch light on after that. I figured whatever it was must not have preferred illumination. Then the knocking commenced. 2 knocks, pause, then 2 more, always around the same time, right around 3:05 a.m. Quiet, deliberate, as though whoever it was knew I was awake. I never replied, never peeked, just sat gripping the iron bar, trying not to breathe too loudly. One morning, I stepped outside and noticed a single river rock positioned on the doormat, perfectly round, smooth, as if polished and entirely clean, too clean. I picked it up, examined it for a mere 2 seconds, and flung it into the woods. Without giving it much thought, I didn't want it lingering in my hand. Later that night, I crashed at Caleb's place. I laid everything out before him and explained the entire ordeal. He didn't even flinch, rising to retrieve a small tin box from a drawer. Inside lay tiny bones, perhaps from birds or rabbits, tied together with red thread and coated in some wax. It appeared handmade, old. "What on earth is this?" I asked. "Just leave it where the dark starts," he replied. I stared at him in disbelief. "Seriously, do it and don't hesitate." So that evening, as the sun set, I headed out back and stopped just before the trees thickened. You could unequivocally see where the light ceased touching the ground. I set the tin down right there, remaining silent and not looking back. That night, no knocking, no light disturbances, nor any dreams. The following days were quiet, even seeming normal. I thought maybe whatever it was had taken the hint. But on Sunday, while stacking wood in the back, I noticed something shift in the trees far back in the dark. Initially, I thought it was merely shadows, but then it moved again. I froze, stared intently. Something crouched low just inside the tree line. Its limbs appeared too long, elbows bent like they shouldn't have been. The skin resembled a stretched plastic wrap. Its face was smooth, wrong, absent of features, just 2 dark voids where eyes should have existed. It didn't move, it simply stared. Backing away, I hurried into the trailer, locked the door, pulled down every blind, and sat there, trembling as though hiding from a nightmare. The next morning, the tin box had reappeared on the porch. However, now, 4 red-painted river rocks lay beside it, each positioned perfectly. I didn't touch them. I didn't venture close. I called Caleb, no answer. I packed a bag, drove directly to his residence, and waited on the porch until his wife returned. I shared everything with her. She listened attentively and then said, "You need to leave that place." "I have a lease," I responded. She locked eyes with me. "Then, break it, or they'll break you." I didn't return that night or the next. When I finally did, in broad daylight, with Caleb riding shotgun, the place reeked like something had decomposed beneath the floor. Wet earth and rot filled the air. Every cabinet stood open, every drawer rummaged through. The fridge was wide, open, food blackening, and the motion light, gone. Not broken, absent. No bulb, no mount, no wires. We exchanged no words. I gathered my things and we left. I never encountered the landlord again, nor did I ever ask for my deposit back. I was 17 when it happened. My parents left early that Friday for a wedding in Tennessee. They were thrilled about it, chatting about it all week. some distant cousin's big day. They told me they'd be back late Sunday night and instructed me to keep an eye on the place. No big deal. I had been home alone before. A weekend by myself, no noise, no one asking me to do chores, just me in the house. Growing up in these woods, isolation never troubled me. The trees behind our house knew every trail, every rock, and every stream. The thought of danger lurking out there never crossed my mind. We lived on a ridge deep in the Appalachian hills. It's beautiful. However, the silence out there isn't like the quiet in town. It's oppressive, settling on your shoulders so that you notice every sound, because there are hardly any neighbors, almost 2 miles down a gravel road that winds like a ribbon. At night, when you step outside, you can hear coyotes calling. From the next valley over, it's that sort of place. Friday evening began normally. I whipped up a quick dinner of ramen and some leftover chicken, classic 17-year-old culinary expertise, and tossed the dishes into the sink thinking, future me can handle that. I sprawled on the couch with the TV buzzing in the background, a faint noise to make the house feel less empty. By midnight, I was in bed with the lights off, scrolling through my phone. The windows were cracked to allow in the cool air while the crickets chirped rhythmically outside. Everything felt ordinary until it didn't. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not light, quick steps like a startled deer but slow, heavy ones on the gravel. Crunch, pause, crunch. Someone was walking, someone human. My body went rigid. I just froze. The front door was locked. The windows had been secured. I had checked earlier. My initial instinct was to grab my phone, but then what? Call the sheriff and say, "Hey, I think someone is walking near my house in the middle of nowhere." They would take at least 30 minutes to arrive, by which point, whoever it was would be long gone. The footsteps drew nearer and nearer until they halted right below my bedroom window. I held my breath, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard from outside. I didn't dare move or even blink. I lay there listening. A minute passed, then another. My chest burned from holding my breath. Then another crunch. Steps again, retreating this time back toward the trees. Each crunch faded until the only sound left was the crickets. I didn't sleep. Not for a second. I just stared at the ceiling, ears straining for any noise. When dawn finally broke, I told myself it was nothing. Had to be nothing. A hunter perhaps, or someone crossing the ridge. That mantra repeated in my mind as I pulled on my boots and stepped outside. Then I spotted the tracks. Bare feet. Not boots, not sneakers, just bare. They were large, long and wide, with toes, splayed as if whoever made them had dug in for grip. They came straight from the woods, curved toward the porch, and then circled the house before disappearing back into the trees. No other hints, no boot scuffs, no dropped gear, no tire marks on the road. Just those naked footprints pressed deeply into the dirt as if whoever it was weighed more than they should have. I stared at those tracks for so long that my breath came out in small clouds, even though the morning wasn't that cold. Then I stepped inside, locked everything again, and told myself, people here sometimes go barefoot. Sure, that happens. Kids swim in the creek. Sometimes people wander. But that didn't explain why they'd come to my window or why they circled the house in the dark. The rest of the day crawled by. I couldn't relax. Every creak sounded amplified. Every shadow seemed too long. I didn't even turn on the TV that night. I just sat in the living room with every light ablaze, as though illuminating it would keep the darkness at bay. Midnight crept forward, then one, then two. My eyelids were growing heavy when my dogs, locked outside in their pen at the edge of the yard, suddenly went berserk. This wasn't their usual, "Hey, there's a deer" bark. They were in full panic, snapping, growling, and hurling themselves against the fence as if something was just out of reach. I bolted to the back window, flipping on the light. The yard was empty, just grass glowing beneath the floodlight and the solid wall of trees beyond. Then I noticed it. At first, I thought it was a stump, but it didn't move. It was a pale shape crouched low at the edge of the trees. Then it shifted. The arms looked wrong, too long, hanging down like extra appendages. The head, oh God, the way it tilted didn't seem like it was looking at the dogs, more like it was listening, slow and jerky, like something learning how a neck functions. I blinked, and it vanished. No noise, no movement. It was just gone, but the dogs remained agitated, still ramming against the fence, teeth bared as if whatever it was hadn't gone far. I retrieved the shotgun from the rack by the door. My hands trembled so fiercely that I dropped the shells twice before managing to load it. I sat there for the remainder of the night, the gun resting across my lap, eyes fixed on the dark, while my heart tried to escape my chest. When morning arrived, I convinced myself it was all in my head. Had to be. Probably just a tree, I figured, my mind filling in the blanks because I was tired. I headed out to check the yard. The prints were back, more this time. Dozens of them, sunk into the mud where the grass thinned out near the woods. They trailed across the yard, up the hill, all around the house, circling it again. Every window had a set beneath it, some pressed so closely that the toes angled upwards into the siding, as if someone had been standing on tiptoe, leaning inside. My hand shook as I tried to call my parents, nearly dropping my phone. I didn't wait for them to answer. I just threw together some clothes into a backpack, locked every door behind me, and fled to the truck. I didn't stop driving until I hit the highway, calling my parents from a gas station 40 miles away and telling them I wouldn't return there alone. At 24 years old last winter, I reluctantly agreed to a task that still makes my stomach turn when I ponder it. My parents enlisted me to check on my grandparents' old house, nestled deep in the Appalachian mountains, during a week of severe snowfall. If you've never ventured there, let me clarify. This is no place for quick grocery runs or amiable neighbor waves. The house perches at the end of a gravel road, curling further into the hills until it feels as if you've left the map entirely. There's no cell service, no nearby lights, just trees and ridges folding in upon themselves. My grandparents had vacated the property for years, having moved to Florida for the sunlight and ease of living, a vastly appealing alternative to what I was about to undertake. Since their departure, the house stood nearly empty. My parents would occasionally visit to prevent it from deteriorating, but it's in a state that feels abandoned, even when someone stands inside. They had compelling reasons for asking me to go this time. The winter prior, several pipes burst when nobody was there, leading to an exorbitant repair bill. This time they required someone to stay through the worst of the cold snap, keeping the wood stove running and ensuring everything remained intact. Simple enough, right? Just toss some wood into the fire, check the taps, and maybe binge a few shows on my laptop. I envisioned it as a rustic getaway, a week clasped in peace and quiet. The drive up started pleasantly. The hills resembled a postcard scene, all powdered white, while my tires crunched along the gravel. For a bit, it was simply me, the heater's hum, and complete serenity. Then as the turns grew sharper and steeper, my signal dropped to 0. That's when I came to terms with my isolation. Upon finally catching sight of the house, it appeared smaller than I recalled, hunched between two slopes as if seeking protection from the wind. The carport sagged just enough to make me wonder if it would withstand the next storm. Regardless, I parked underneath, collected my duffel, and trudged up the steps. The key stuck, as usual, and once I pushed the door open, that familiar stale aroma flooded out, a mix of dust, dry wood, and a subtly metallic scent, like rust fermenting in the walls. It wasn't unpleasant, just dormant. I tossed my bag into the upstairs bedroom and got the wood stove fired up. It groaned like an aging man waking from slumber before settling into a low crackle. The house emitted its routine sounds, the pops and creaks I grew up hearing during summer visits. Back then, they never unsettled me. This time, however, every noise felt amplified, as if the house was leaning in closer to demand my attention. Out here, darkness doesn't creep in. It comes crashing down. One moment you're enjoying the last bits of grey sky through the window, and the next, it's akin to someone painting the glass black. There's no glow from the town, no headlights passing through. Just me, and if I stared too long, my reflection. In the window. I figured I would call it an early night, serenaded by the quiet. But that silence wasn't what I'd anticipated. It wasn't blissful. It felt substantial, as though the air bore weight pressing down. I frequently caught myself, straining to hear, as if my ears awaited something nameless. Yet, nothing occurred. No reason for the tension coiling within me. Eventually, fatigue took me, but sleep was restless, where every tiny sound jolted me awake. Morning, however, felt like a relief. I brewed coffee on the gas stove, burned my tongue on the first sip due to my lack of patience, and stepped out onto the back porch to survey the snow. It was pristine, untouched, as if someone had ironed the entire yard, except for one peculiar thing: footprints. A single set emerged from the trees, leading directly to the porch. I stood there for a moment, coffee cradled as if it would provide answers if I stared hard enough. Eventually, I placed it down and stepped closer. The impressions were deep, spaced apart, as though the person who made them was either carrying something substantial or was considerably heavy. They came to a halt, right at the foot of the porch steps. No diversion, no return trail, just stopped. I crouched down, attempting to determine if snow had drifted in covering the rest, but the footprints at the edge remained distinct, leading me to suspect otherwise. I resolved they must have been concealed by the wind. It had to make sense. I returned inside, instinctively locked the door, and decided to cease overthinking. Day 2 dragged on. I fed the fire, patrolled the perimeter while the sun still shined, and checked the pipes beneath the sinks. Everything appeared fine, yet those prints idled stubbornly in the back of my mind. With every time the wind rattled a window, I flinched. That night, the chilling cold settled in deep. The walls groaned as if the house braced itself. Flickering shadows from the stove danced across the ceiling while I fought for sleep. I repeatedly told myself I would acclimate to this, but I didn't. On day 3, the power cut out, a common occurrence out there whenever heavy snowfalls occurred. However, when it happened, the entire house didn't just darken. It felt darker than dark, as if the blackness bore weight. I lit a couple of candles and placed them on the kitchen table, reassuring myself that it was trivial, a mere storm, just a house, just me. That's when I noticed the back door unlocked. I distinctly remembered securing it earlier, how tightly the deadbolt had been fitted, requiring a bit of pressure to lock. Now it felt loose, hanging there as if it had never been touched. My stomach plummeted. My immediate thought was I had messed up, that I'd merely imagined securing it due to my frayed mental state from the solitude. So I locked it again, slid the chain across the top, and confirmed the front door was tight as well. Both were secured. I remained downstairs for some time, sitting at the table and pretending to read by flickering candlelight, while every nerve in my body honed in on that door. Each creak from the stove gave me a jolt. Eventually, I soothed myself into believing I was being foolish. A power outage, an old house creaking. Of course I was on edge. I extinguished the candles and retreated upstairs. Sleep never arrived, not genuine sleep. I lay there, awake and staring at the ceiling, straining my ears until it hurt. Then I heard it, a distinct creak, sharp and clear, emanating from downstairs, akin to weight settling on a floorboard near the kitchen. I froze. My heart pounded against my ribs hard enough to feel it in my throat. I held my breath, waiting for anything else, a second sound, a whisper, anything. Yet nothing surfaced. Minutes crawled by like hours. Ultimately, I rationalized it was the house adjusting to the cold. Wood does that, right? Right. I lingered in bed until the first, muted light streaked across the window. When I finally steeled myself to descend, the very first sight captured me. The back door. It stood ajar just inches, but enough for snow to gust inside, creating a thin drift along the threshold. The chain dangled broken against the frame, its metal warped as though it were nothing. Outside, fresh footprints trailed away from the porch toward the trees, bigger than mine with longer strides, yet every few steps, one foot dragged, leaving a faint mark as if something heavy were being towed. I didn't follow them. I didn't so much as glance at the tree line. I shut the door and secured the lock even though it felt futile. I packed my bag in under 2 minutes, grabbed my keys, and left. When my parents asked about it later, I simply stated that the weather had been harsh and I didn't feel safe staying there.